Welcome to the South Burlington School Board meeting. And we'll start with any comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda. All right, seeing none. David, do we have any amendments?
We do not.
All right. And we'll move on to announcements and student rep report. Cole?
So the South Burlington High School Drama has announced that their fall musical will be Beauty and the Beast. South Burlington High School dance teams will be performing as special guests at the Dancing with the Stars of Burlington. Also dancing at the event will be SBHS's Activities Director, Mike Jabor. You can support his team by donating from the link on Dancing with the Stars of Burlington's Facebook page. This benefits the Vermont Association of the Blind and Visually Impaired, and the event is Sunday, September 8th. A mailing to all SBHS families with start of school information and forms will be sent out this Friday, August 9th. Meet the Coaches Night for SBHS Fall Sports will be August 13th at 7 p.m. Tryouts and practices begin for football and cheerleading August 12th, while all other sports begin August 15th. Schedules are being mailed to 9th graders August 14th, while for all other high school students, they will go live on Power School August 16th. And SBHS laptop distribution runs from August 21st to the 23rd. Check the high school's webpage calendar for times and locations. Laptops can also be picked up during the first week of school.
Great, thank you. And I think convocation is scheduled for August 21st?
23rd.
23rd.
Yep. You're all welcome to attend.
Great. 8 a.m. in the auditorium.
Yep. A little coffee mingling, and then we get started around the 8:30 time frame. Approximately. We try to stay tight to that timeline, but a little bit off sometimes. A couple of other just quick announcements. You know, the state's been working to implement their whole new software. It's the SSDDMS, of course, acronyms. And we were initially in round 5, which would have had us doing that work now. There's not a yet active handbook out, and there's not a chart of accounts out yet. And we collectively have worked hard and asked for a lot of clarifications and felt that it was not appropriate for us to just start in on round 5. So we asked. We've been moved to round 6, which gives us a year. It's our hope that the handbook will be done so you'll know how to code things, and the chart of accounts will be done as well so that we'll know with some level of accuracy on where we put things. We tried to advocate also, for the greater population, but that obviously did not prevail. They're needing to move forward. So that's.
Can you explain what that?
Yeah. So. Yep. So actually, Gary, if you want to take a shot at it, you want.
So I couldn't hear what Mark.
The SSDDMS, moving to the new software statewide financial system. And they have different rounds, so just
If you could explain the
is.
software and explain what's happening, just for folks who might be reviewing this.
Well, it's pretty simple. There's the statewide software is a Power School product called eFinance Plus. The goal of that is to standardize the chart of accounts. It will standardize the input for state reporting, and the goal at the state level is to make that data much more user-friendly to compare apples to apples across districts, and to consolidate reporting so they can get a more accurate picture of the financial conditions comparatively across the state. So we are currently going to be in round 6, which will start July of 2021 to go live.
Have other districts already gone live on this, or
Yeah, they're in the process. Yeah.
in the process? Right?
Yep, there are a few. Burlington is the only local district, I believe, that is live right now, and that just started on July 1st.
Okay, thanks.
Has there been any conversation with Nathan Lavery over there about, without a manual or without a chart of accounts, how they went live?
I believe, like, Amity has had a couple of conversations. It sounds like they're having a little difficulty with payroll. They're getting through it, but my understanding, it's been fairly cumbersome for them.
Mm-hmm. And if we're in the 6th round, how many rounds are
8.
planned total?
There are 8 rounds total.
Yeah, I mean, again, we have advocated that we think that before you begin to do the inputs, it's best to have all of the information so that, if you who've been doing this work for a long time, and so have you can put the things in the right categories and the right charting.
Right.
The worry is that you're gonna do the best you can, but when we go down the road, 5 years, it's gonna be skewed data because, well, I did my best and you
Coded,
did your
yeah.
best, and someone's gonna come back out and say, well, the data's not quite, there's some variability here. Well, why don't we try to get the handbook done? That's due out in the fall. We did ask that. That's due to us. The handbook is, again, handbook 2 is a guiding principle on kind of the fund accounting inputs that we do. And that's due to us, that's due to the state by fall. They didn't say early or late fall, but the fall. And then the chart of accounts is due to finish up. And it's also been said that the chart of accounts it's not significantly different, or there's not a significant amount of change. But we also say, well, any little bit of change can be enough variance that it can have, again, exactly what we're trying, as Gary identified, what we were trying to eliminate around, quick and accurate reporting. So I obviously what we're hearing is they can't push everybody to round 8 because then they don't have capacity. We were simply saying, can some of this be elongated a little bit so we can get those things in play? But that's a significant amount of work for us also. At the same time, if we were in round 5, at the same time we have a lot of other pretty major projects going on as well. So.
Well, thanks for
Thanks.
advocating for the district.
Thanks, Gary, also.
David, I don't know if you've considered updating this anywhere in this agenda, but I've also read some press about some potential changes in special ed funding. Are there any updates there that are relevant to the board?
Again, remember that it used to be
It's block funding now, or block grants.
right, and so it's moving, to a system by which you can serve a much greater population of students, and you don't need to do the service plans as you did in the past for individual the students within your district. And so it gives you a little bit more flexibility. The problem with this is how we meld the old system to the new and how the funding will follow without significant reductions. And we're currently kind of figuring, the AOE is trying to figure out how that's going to happen. I don't know, anything to add on that?
Not really, except that there's a lot of question about the June 5th and 6th memorandums from the state about the changes in funding and having significant impact on district special ed funding model after the budget cycle was already done, the loss of hundreds of thousands of dollars in special ed revenue when budget cycles were complete and then the rules changed for funding.
And that's the
before that,
communication I'm
during the same
referring
fiscal
to.
year. So there has been some communication of concern from the special educators in Vermont, and I think some of the superintendents.
Yes.
Is that hard and fast, that change in the funding?
As of now, it is.
Yeah.
We haven't, Amity is working on, and Joanne are working on how much it could affect us, but I don't think we have an answer at this time.
All right, thank you. All right, we'll move on to city and school collaboration.
I don't have a lot. I did bring copies of the final addendum agreement for each of you, if you would like it. There was a fair amount of work that went into getting us here.
Just as a quick question, I did see some information about the week of August 5th. Market Street work, is that still on schedule, that is getting the
Base coat?
base coat? Yeah.
I've got that. So August 12th, paving will start with that base coat. I was at the Marcotte construction meeting yesterday, or the Market Street construction meeting yesterday. Things are pretty much on schedule. They're finishing some of the intersection work this week, and the base coat will start from Dorset Street west to the school entrance, beginning on the 12th.
So that
And it's-
was
they
about a
think
week off, but
Yeah.
Days of-
still before
We had
school.
5th when we were with.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Everything else, Gary, as far as you know, the painting and striping was on target to be in late October, and then the total project would be done by the 19th of November.
Yes.
Those timelines still are in play.
They're good,
Yeah.
as far as right now.
And from your perspective on, parent guardian information around the first part of school, expect any particular issues there with the paving or the?
They've committed to communicating any one-lane periods, which they think will be very limited. So I'm going to attend the meetings every week, so we can communicate appropriately when those periods will happen. Right now, they're planning two-way traffic for when school opens.
Right.
On a paved surface, so that's a plus in my mind.
Does it say when Market Street will be reopened completely, so you can get to Marcotte from Heinsberg Road?
I don't know. I guess I made the assumption, Alex, that would be
The-
like the November
19th.
19th timeframe.
Uh-huh.
That's what that's what I understood from
Okay.
the city too, that they're
Alright.
saying the project will be fully done, open and operational by the
Mhm.
November 19th
Yeah.
timeframe. I'm sure there may be other pieces in the middle of that. I don't know what their phasing is on that, whether it will be, maybe one lane will open up for a while. I don't know.
I don't know.
Well, if that road is closed, it'd be important to communicate that before school starts.
Well, the road has been closed
Oh, yeah,
indefinitely, so we'll certainly let people know
yeah.
the kind of
Yeah,
the
we'll
timeline.
definitely Communicate the projected open date.
Yep.
Good.
But I'm operating under the assumption from a transportation standpoint that, we are starting the school year with all routes entering off from the Dorset Street
Yeah.
direction.
Okay.
All right. Anything else? All right, we'll move on to the superintendent's report.
So I've got two items here. The update you on the Chamberlain School, the Rick Marcotte School, which we've already done a little bit on as well. And then I wanted to just also give you an update on where we are with the year-end funding. So again, glad that Gary's here because he can just keep right on helping me out with my superintendent's report. So the Chamberlain noise mitigation component, again, Gary's been, heading that up for me, and I know he's had a couple meetings with L&N, which is the contractor. So allow him to give you a little bit of an update on that.
So we met to finalize the input for the LN engineering assessment of current conditions at the Chamberlain School. I received the initial report today, reviewed that. So to summarize, they went through the entire heating system and ventilation system as it exists now, and they made recommended water source heat pump system to be installed. That's their recommendation to the Jones Payne Group. They gave two options for water source heat pump, and that is one geothermal and one traditional water source heat pump. So overall, those recommendations are positive. The entire school will have heating and cooling based off that heat pump. And they added the cooling component with the new updated systems, the energy costs are comparable to what we have right now. So for what we pay right now for heat and electricity, we will have heating, cooling, and electricity for virtually the same utility cost. So next steps, that same report that I got today went to the Jones Payne Group, which is the FAA airport contracted consulting firm. So they will evaluate that. They will send it for a cost estimation, and the cost estimation will provide the input for application for the FAA grant funding. So I will, as soon as Jones Payne gets a few days to kind of digest the report, I'll follow up with them. I'll ask them to provide us a timeline for the estimating, for the FAA grant, and for potential construction.
So again, people who might be wondering about whether or not we're still in the queue for the grant, obviously what Gary's alluding to is that being pushed by the FAA and the Jones Payne Group, who contract with L&N, you know, we're doing all of the things that we need to be doing to comply with the grant applications. If we weren't in the queue, then we wouldn't be doing this. And so, I mean, we feel good about that. And we also know that the arrival of the F-35s are due September around, and we also know that they're unlikely to be flying in the month of September and even October, and we'll keep watchful of that around the potential disruption to student learning. Again, the building is okay when the windows are closed. It's a bit loud, a little too loud, can be disruptive to learning when the windows are open. So it's those times of the seasons that windows are open that is the concern. And that's what, again, the L&N component is evaluating, that coming up with a system that allows you to keep the windows shut.
And we will look and prepare for potential mitigation strategies for the May-June timeframe of the upcoming school year, in case we determine that we need to take some action to have the windows closed during the shoulder season hot weather at the end of the year.
So I think the two questions I have are really the runway time for the grant itself, because I've heard that could be years, frankly. It's not necessarily a guarantee once it goes through all this process, estimate, grant, construction, that happens in any expeditious fashion. And then the other is reconciliation of the 10%, because that's not entirely clear that with a municipality, sort of who is on the hook for that. And my understanding is it might be Burlington. Is that accurate?
I didn't get a definitive answer, but I did ask that question to the FAA representative who came and met with us at Chamberlain. And he said, and this is a paraphrase quote, that it's typically, it's the sponsor that is responsible for the 10%. And the sponsor in this case is the Burlington International Airport. So I don't know if, where that's gonna go. I think it will require some legal opinion for sure, and some collaboration with both the FAA and the airport, maybe the cities of Burlington and South Burlington, to get a definitive answer.
So I guess point being, the timeframe could be influenced by securing the 10% funding as well.
I suppose, I mean, we
That's a question.
yeah, I don't know.
The
Yeah.
question I don't have an answer for
You don't.
right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know if any other board members have questions on the Chamberlain matter?
Those were my 2 questions.
Awesome.
Oh, sorry, Mark.
Well, so, no, that was,
So next is just an update on the Rick Marcotte. And again, I think we have to be careful of just saying 180 Market Street, because not everybody knows where 180 Market Street is. But the Rick Marcotte School, which is located off of Market Street, and the land that was conveyed to the city with an address that will be the 180 Market Street. And currently, as I said, you have the signed definitive agreement that's out that we worked through. A couple of weeks now have passed, and we're in the process, obviously, of, as Gary said, making sure that access and all of the things that we've agreed to are in place. I don't know. Again, I think you've already given that update. I don't know if, again, there's any other questions specific to 180 Market. I know we talked about it earlier, but.
And just to confirm, did the city sign off on the addendum and all
Yes,
the
they did.
permits?
Mm-hmm.
And the permits as well? So those are sitting with,
Whoever they need to be.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Yep.
okay.
And the last thing on the here, which is not on the agenda, is just to give a little bit of an update on the year end. And remember, probably 3 weeks ago, I gave you kind of an update on we were short by some. It appeared to be that we'd be short on our year end funding by about $80,000. And again, this is still what I would say, not yet final. It won't be until the audit comes in, obviously, but it looks like our undesignated fund balance for the 18-19 school year will be somewhere within the $50,000 to $100,000 to the positive. So again, just giving you an update. Obviously, we'd like to be exact, but we don't have all of that available. But we have run the fair amount of analysis and believe we'll be somewhere within that $50,000 to $100,000 to the good.
So can that be an offset for the deficit then?
So it won't be a deficit.
That's a positive fund balance.
No, but that could offset the 80,000 deficit.
Oh, no, the
I know what she's
80,000
saying.
was the estimated.
Oh, that's included
deficit.
in the
That's right.
positive, okay.
So
gotcha.
the reanalysis of where we are with all of the end of the year things that happen, right, with all of the reconciliation of special ed, everything that comes in, we were anticipating we were going to be short by the 80.
Mhm.
As we've continued through the end of the year and now reconciliation, we're into that, what we're going to say, 50 to 100 to the positive. So, again, just giving you some update.
Happy day for us on our side of the.
I imagine. I would ask that, given that the deficit kind of came as a bit of surprise, and now, kind of one
Not.
board meeting later, there's a swing to the positive of equal, if not more. It might be helpful to do a reconciliation of that.
Rationale or what
Yeah,
happened?
what the reconciliation was between a deficit of 80 and a potential surplus of 100.
Yeah, I mean, we can do that. We will be doing that.
So you're
anyway
gonna-
through
That'd be
through our
helpful.
audit process and.
And so we have a monitoring report. I mean, I think this can be a bigger conversation too, on a $50 million budget. You obviously know we had some, corrective actions that were within. I feel like we probably should have a longer conversation about, contingency dollars, what we should have on hand. Should it be 0.5%? Should it be some amount that we carry forward or that we anticipate? Again, I'm not wanting to, poo-poo the issues that we had and some errors, but in the end, this is very, very tight, even to the
Yeah, and I'm not
plus.
saying from a materiality standpoint on the total budget, it's not that material, but in a short time frame, there was a pretty big swing. And I'm speaking as a board member, I'd like to understand what that reconciliation was, which it sounds like has to be done anyway for the audit.
Yep. Sure. Okay.
Any other questions? All right. Move on to master planning and visioning.
So we have, Lee, we need to get him set up on this projector, Gary. And it's just plugging your laptop in yeah. So while Lee's doing that, we wanted to, again, bring back before the board. We have obviously volume. I think. So we have this board meeting, we have the meeting on the 21st, and we have the 4th. And so again, Doran Whittier, working with our various groups, and you're going to get a little overview from Lee and his group around some of the work that's been done by the various groups. But definitely they're in need of some further direction from the board. And so tonight is really just a really quick overview of what is needed from you and some added guidance. And obviously that will come back to you with a more of a, presentation on the 21st, and then being able for you to walk into making some decisions, some additional decisions, I should say, on which direction you want to go. Currently, we're at a high school, a new high school and a new middle school, which was the direction from the board. And at the last meeting, there was a discussion again by Bridget that came up that brought into the equation an indoor track facility. Obviously, in order for Dorn Whittier to do the work that they need to do, they're going to need to narrow that down. Is it in or is it out? And they'll have some preliminary numbers, but they're going to need to get some additional direction from you all before they are able to do that effectively. So we're happy to have Lee here, his team. Again, we've been meeting quite regularly. A lot of folks have been at the table to provide input and feedback for them to kind of discern and get onto what I would say just kind of, sketch drawings that allow us to further evaluate where we are. So, Lee.
We need to move.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody, again. We've been doing a lot of work with the staff and administration over the last month and a half, and this is just to kind of bring you up to speed on the work that we've been doing, what we've got for some, and as David mentioned, some decision points for us moving forward, and we just wanted to kind of bring you guys up to speed and answer some questions that you may have, and hopefully you guys can point us in a direction. So for the topics that we wanted to talk about tonight, this pre-bond design phase that we're in, what we're working on is really solidifying the space program for both the high school and the middle school, number of spaces, the size of spaces, where those spaces should be in relation to each other, how a middle school and a high school together work and function. We had a lot of discussion about an indoor track facility, and this idea came up earlier during the feasibility study, and it's been explored a little bit further. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later. And some site planning options. With the options that you've kind of given us direction to move forward with, we're at a point right now, as David alluded to, where we can't carry 5 different paths forward into detailed design to be able to get to a final cost estimate. So we're at a point right now where we think we have a pretty good handle on the building size and what's going to go in them and how they could be arranged on the site. But a lot of that depends on some decisions that get made with regards to a potential for an indoor track facility, what's going to happen with the middle school moving forward, and where do these things go on the site. And to that end, we've got a proposed schedule that we want to go over with you, just to see if it makes sense on trying to make some of those decisions if we're looking for a March vote and some next steps moving forward.
So again, the purpose of this meeting, just to be crystal clear, is this is information for you guys. There's no decision out of this meeting, and there'll be nothing in the August 21st either. And so public are encouraged to come and listen and follow along, but the 4th of September would be a date that we're kind of
proposing.
Yeah.
So the work accomplished with the high school and middle school programs, we've been meeting consistently, weekly, with the principals and leaderships teams. We put together what we call these user groups for both the high school and the middle school over the summer, and that was working with staff and department heads and administration to really kind of take a deeper dive from what we did at the study level to talk about the different number of spaces and how the programs are going to work and what's really going to go on inside of the classrooms that we're talking about. There was about 40 staff and parents that came to those 2 meetings. There were day-long meetings held at our office. We also had a meeting with the Big Picture, Career Development Center, and Business Leadership team to talk about how the synergies of those 3 programs come together potentially in a new building project. And as I mentioned, a deeper review of all the space needs and an update to that space program. So that's what we're working on. The indoor track facility, as I mentioned, we talked, initially the idea came up during the study. It's the largest enrolled sport in South Burlington. There's approximately 100 to 150 students at the high school level. It's about 10 to 15% of your enrollment. And it's also about 60% of the spring track students actually sign up for indoor track. Currently, it's not offered at indoor track at the middle school just because the facility, there is nothing for it. but there are approximately 130 to 160 middle school students enrolled in track. And if you use that same kind of rule of thumb of 60% of the high school spring track folks are, signing up for indoor track, you have a potential pool between middle school and high school of over 200 kids that are in that sport here in South Burlington. There are no facilities that support that program currently on campus. The students run in the hallways after school. This has presented itself as an ongoing safety concern. I've seen some stuff from the insurance company, saying it's probably not a good idea to be running in the hallways. There's no facility currently available in the state of Vermont for hosting the Vermont Principals Association sanctioned events. And there's generally a lack of indoor practice space for other sports that could benefit from a facility such as this: lacrosse, field hockey, baseball, softball. We live in Vermont, so we're used to being in cold weather, and spring sports really suffers when we have inclement weather. So that stuff kind of led us to, there's a significant need, and so we should talk about it a little bit more, and what does that actually equate to? Here are some pictures of what's been going on in the school when they're practicing in the hallways. Obviously, it's not an ideal condition. We've done some research. We did hold another user group meeting just for the track program, and we had about 20 people, some alum from the school and the track programs, area track coaches from University of Vermont. We had some folks there from Randolph High School and others, just trying to understand what the need is generally, not just in South Burlington, but regionally as well. And we started to look at facilities that have these programs. Some of them are in higher ed, and some of them are in private schools, and some of them, not in Vermont, but in Massachusetts, have some of these facilities. So we've explored those to try and understand how those programs work, what types of elements that they put in this facility. And then we started to think about, if you had to build a box around an indoor track, and you got a nice big oval in the middle of it, and it's about 60,000 square feet to put this box together, what else that we would already be proposing as square footage could we put inside there, co-locate, to be efficient? So we started looking through our program to find things that might make sense. Just to understand exactly what the requirements of something like this, to be VPA sanctioned, it would have to be a 200-meter track, 6 lanes, 8-lane straightaway. There would need to be space for field events, for pole vault and high jumps, et cetera. The infield space, as I mentioned before, you can put several things in the infield. You can put basketball courts, you can put multi-purpose fields, you can put down turf, the opportunities are really endless about what we want to put in there. So that's why we were looking for program spaces that we would already be paying for that make sense to put in there. It would also need locker rooms and bathrooms and parking. And again, it's approximately 60,000 square feet. And here's a couple pictures. This one's down at Exeter, which is a new facility that they built. 6-lane track, and they've got their field events outside of the oval, and they've got a multi-surface floor where they actually have tennis courts and volleyball in the center. Middlebury College also has a nice indoor recreation center. They're not actually renting this out to anybody else in Vermont. They're using it solely for themselves. But it gives you a sense of the scale of the space and what we're talking about. The possibilities to co-locate our program into a facility like this would be the high school gymnasium spaces. There's 2 full basketball courts in the high school program right now that could be, in the middle of that oval. We have movement studios, we have weight room, we have a cardio program and square footage for that. Locker rooms, team rooms. We've been talking about an elevated walking track that could be there too. We're going to have a lobby. They're going to need a lobby. We do need to do some more work with the city to talk about their ongoing program right now with rec needs, and if there's any synergy between what we're doing and what they're doing to be cost effective for the community. Our current thought right now is not to include the middle school physical education spaces within that. We want to keep that separate and keep those age groups separate. So that's been the line of thinking from the working group to date.
For their program, but although they could utilize it in an after-school, program.
Absolutely, just physical location
Right.
is, we would put the middle school gym, with the middle school is what we're proposing right now. So the decision topics that we're looking to talk to you guys about tonight these are some of the options that we have on the table. There's the option for a new high school, and attaching it to the existing middle school and just doing the infrastructure. There's an option, all new high school and middle school, and one of our goals is to have an option that has no phasing, where you can build it all at once and keep schools up and running. We've got several options where we've got a new high school and middle school with phasing. In other words, we're going to be moving kids from a new building into an older building while we're building a new one. So there's some time and constructability issues there. We don't know, is the indoor track facility something that should be contemplated for this project? And so when you put all of those things in play with us from a design perspective, we need to take into consideration, how does this stuff lay out on the site and make sense? How do we keep the existing schools operational and safe day to day, because nobody's going to be leaving campus and all the kids are coming? How do we limit phasing and construction duration, because that's going to drive cost. It's also going to drive educational value, because the less disruption we can be doing, the faster we get in and out, the better it's going to be for everybody. Where the existing outdoor track goes, last time I was here, that was one of the things we talked about, was we're going to look at trying to keep that where it is. And we're trying to preserve in some options, the forested area in the northwest corner and out in front of the middle school. So that's kind of what's in front of us right now. And what we've tried to do is package these into some simplified concepts so we can wrap our heads around some of the options here. So the existing site you guys are more than familiar with. The first concept that we are looking at is a new high school, a new middle school, and a new indoor track facility. So this would be the high school new construction up on the varsity baseball field. You can see the background of the existing middle school right here. And this option, the indoor track facility, and you can see its footprint. It's almost a similar size to the footprint as the middle school, would be built in that place. And here's a new middle school out front, new parking. In this case, we've lost one of those sacred cows that you guys talked about with the mature trees, but we've been able to keep the existing track and stadium as it stands. So it's good in the north location. We have met with city planning to kind of talk about this in general, and from the city's development regulations where they'd like to see planning on Dorset Street go, they like to see more of an urban frontage on Dorset Street. So the buildings are closer to the front and the parking is more in the back. And that's what you've seen in some of the build out that's happening on Dorset Street. While we understand that school design is a little bit different from a typical business or retail use, and safety is a paramount concern for us, and being able to have good site circulation, being able to have the schools situated where there's good visual access to people coming onto campus, we have to look at all of those things and weigh those out, where we're siting these buildings. So this is an option that tries to take into account what the city planning was looking for and trying to meld that together with all the stuff that we've heard to date. There is some phasing involved in this. We would build the new high school first, and then after that's built, we'd move the high school kids in, and then we would demo the high school, and then we would build the new middle school and demo the old middle school, and then build the track facility. So it's almost a 4-part thing, and you can see these are, and you have to look at them as it's an ongoing project. So when you start building the high school, the contractor is going to come in and mobilize, and they're going to do that whole thing, button it up, done, turnkey, and then they're waiting, right, until we do the demolition and then the move, versus when they can come in and do everything all at once. So this is a longer construction duration than some of the other ones I'm going to show you.
Right, so phases equal length. I mean, obviously.
Phases equal duration, phases equal educational disruption and moves, and time is money. So those are the three things that we're looking at on this.
I think it's important to note the impact that moving faculty and students from a building that they have been in to another old building and then to a new building is a pretty big lift.
Yeah, you definitely want to try and limit the amount of moves that you end up having to put students and staff through. So concept 2, and again, these are just big picture concepts. This is a new high school, a new indoor track facility, and we attach those and just do infrastructure at the middle school. Again, it's built out on the varsity baseball field. This does impact the existing track, as you can see, and we've had to relocate that track adjacent to it. We've got some good site access. One of the things we're doing in all these options is separating bus drop-off from parent drop-off, and you can see we've scattered parking kind of all around this plan. Again, this is another multi-phased approach where you got to build the new high school, demo it, move kids around. So it's a multi-year process. Concept 3 is just the new high school attached to working on the infrastructure at the middle school. There's a new middle school gym as part of the program that we would use as the connector to the new high school. And in this option, there is no indoor track facility. Again, this comes with phasing as well. Not as much as the other ones, but there's still some here. Concept 4 is taking a different look at locations. And so this has, again, new high school, new middle school, and a new indoor track facility. It's in the northwest corner of the site. We're actually building the new high school on the existing parking lot, keeping both of the existing buildings up and running. It's a little bit tighter because you're kind of right in between them, and we'd have to have, some satellite. We'd be building all of this parking first before we started the high school. Again, this has several phases. This kind of meets more of the city intent of, building on Dorset and putting, parking on the side or in the back. We've been able to keep the track in this one. And there's still some woods left out, so that kept everything intact. And so we're going to cost this one out and see what it looks like. The fifth and final concept is building everything back on the east side of the site all at once. So basically, you'd end up drawing a line across the site with a construction fence. You'd keep everything on the front operational as schools, and everything gets built in one phase all at once. This does, there's just not enough room to fit all of this stuff back there without moving the stadium. So we would move that adjacent to it, fill in with parking in the front, and you'd be able to keep the woods in the front. We haven't laid out in any of these options, what we're going to be doing when the high school comes down and how we'd add extra play fields and parking. But this is just trying to give you the big picture concept. And so these are the 5 things that we're going to price out and to be able to give you levels of magnitude between each of these options, how they relate to each other and cost. We'll be able to, and then we're going to bring these back for the 21st. We're going to be able to talk to you about what the construction durations are for each of those, so you can be able to evaluate these on their own merits. So that's kind of where we're at right now. And if in the schedule update, when we kind of backed into this and said if we're shooting for March, what we need is tonight's update to you just to show you where we are. August 21st, come back with the cost estimates and any questions that you may have. And then September 4th, what we're hoping for is to get some direction about what the scope of this project is. Is it, new high school, middle school, and track? Is it just, 2 out of those 3 components? And where generally do we feel that it's appropriate to locate this on the site that's going to have the least amount of impact, and when we're all done and everything's peeled back, that we say we've done a really good job here of planning for the future and safety and security of the campus. From September through December, we would take that final option and develop it into a schematic design package with a lot more detail, so we can get a firmer cost estimate that you would be taking forward to the voters in March. And then our work from December to March would be to get out there and inform the public about the project and everything related to it. So that's just a quick snapshot of where we're at and where we'd like to go. And I'm happy to answer any questions, especially back on some of these.
Couple questions. One of the concepts did not have the indoor track and field, is that right?
Correct.
It was, okay.
That one.
So where is the conversation with the city regarding their plans for a rec center? I mean, what do we know about their plans at this point?
Yeah, so we know that the city, put forth an RFP for an architect. We know that Freeman, French and Freeman was selected to do the design phase. We know that they're in the process of doing that, and we have reached out to the city officials to say, we'd be interested in having a conversation.
Well, I think it's more than being interested in having a conversation. If they're putting in a rec center that would have an indoor track, I can't imagine why we would do that.
They're not putting an indoor
That's
track.
right.
They're putting it in a walking track, elevated 3-lane walking track. It would be nowhere near the size of what you would need for a sanctioned indoor track competition event.
So Can they be talked into doing that?
That's part of what the reach out is currently with the city, is to talk about, again, I mean, maybe they've fully identified their need and fully identified their usage, you know, and again, we're trying to understand that.
What was the time frame that we heard they would have results back? I thought it was early September. I don't know if you know or not.
I've forgotten that.
They were initially, and I'm certainly not speaking for the city, initially, there was a plan to try and have a schematic phase done and a cost estimate done for a November vote. From what I've heard, I think that's slowed down a little bit.
For a November vote for a
That
rec-
was what they were initially planning under this current facility design, was to put it before the voters in
But
November.
we had asked if there was going to be anything on the ballot they anticipated, and the answer was no.
No, initially.
Initially. I haven't heard that it's yes at all
Right.
in our
That's right. We've heard that
informal
things are.
conversation.
It just doesn't, I'm sorry, it just doesn't seem that the city would be able to handle, or the voters would want to vote for a rec center and an indoor track and field that, I mean, there's so much overlap that there
Yeah, I
could be
think
there.
the
that-
conversation was that, I believe the expectation was there would be some feedback from this concept design, I'll just say September timeframe, so that could be overlaid against what was being done here, which is largely curriculum-driven, or intended to be, I think, correct me if I'm wrong. So you'd sort of be overlaying city-based needs from a rec department standpoint, broader community with school curriculum needs, and seeing if there's a match, for instance. And some examples I've heard might be a need for, like, again, I'm just pulling this out of the air, like 5 basketball courts versus what I think you've indicated here might be 2 or 3. Or so that's, it would be a marrying up of what those 2 needs would be, and could they be accommodated or traded off in one area. But there's no baseline to understand what the city needs, rec department needs are until we get that information.
I know one thing that's pretty clear is that the program missions are very different. And everything that we've been trying to set up with the school project is definitely driven around curriculum needs and what you have as existing programs that need better facilities. With the rec program, it's a completely different driver and different population base that they're trying to serve. And scheduling has been an ongoing issue for them for a long time, because they've been, using your elementary school gyms. And so there is certainly a definitive need that they've put out there for gym floor space. So at least in their initial version of their project, they had 4 gym courts, an elevated walking track, and a kind of movement yoga Pilates studio. That was their program. And when we kind of looked at that initially with what you guys were doing, the big problem is scheduling. And when we've talked about all of the PE components in this project, it's pretty heavily scheduled just from your own uses right now. So there's certainly some opportunity potentially for some overlap in there, but it's going to take some good conversations with them to understand what their needs and schedule are versus what the schedule of the school is.
So the curriculum needs and the scheduling, you mean for the indoor track and field?
Yeah, for physical education space, which
But I
is
thought
the
that you
gym.
were going to be separate physical education
No,
space.
for the high school, the physical education space would be included within
Within
the
that indoor track facility.
in one of those concepts.
To give you that example, Martin, here's the indoor track facility. So what we'd be trying to put in this box is there's the track. Inside the track, we have 4 basketball courts in our program between the high school and the middle school. 3 of them can fit inside there, right? So that helps take up some of that square footage, because that was space we would be paying for as part of the project anyway. Whereas the middle school, we're actually showing the middle school gym over here. And part of that rationale has been really looking through the scheduling aspects of what the school is doing and where do we hold, the performance competition gym basketball games. And do you hold that inside of a track? You could, But ideally, you could hold that, in the middle school gym at night, and the middle school kids use their PE space during the day. It's in the middle school. They don't have to walk through the high school to get to PE space at the high school.
So, I don't mean to get into a detail, but so what is the evening basketball that happens in the middle school gym?
There would be the sports high school competition.
You mean today, or?
Yeah, right now, I'm just,
Which Jim?
in the middle school gym,
It's after school, middle school, basketball time, and it's competition usually.
but is that
Two-
rec department, or is that,
It's
we don't
school.
have, middle
have-
school has,
Basketball, boys and girls.
right,
Seventh and
right,
eighth
okay, and
grade.
that's after school,
And
of
that's
course.
after school, and the competitions are
Right, right,
close after school,
There's-
not evening games like the high school.
right.
So again, that space could be used, but, that space could be used for that capacity and then also used for the high school games.
Do we rent out now to like AAU or anything?
We do.
We do. AAU and Mini Metro. Mini Metro practices all basketball season every morning at 6:30.
But presumably that would move to the this recreation facility of the cities.
Well, that's not
Presumably.
necessarily what they're thinking, I don't think, right? I don't think they're building, I don't know.
Well, I
exactly
think,
the
Martin,
scope
you're
of that.
asking a really fundamental question, which is, is there a need for two facilities with redundancy within the South Burlington community?
Right.
And that is a fundamental question.
Right.
We're in the same place.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and frankly, I'm, just really early, I would be leaning against that happening, because this is gonna be a heavy lift for this community as it is, and adding this onto this makes it that much more difficult, particularly if there's, people view it as redundant.
Well, if it could be, I guess I look at it and say, if it supports curriculum and addresses many, if not most, of the needs of the community, which I agree with your comment, Lee, that scheduling becomes kind of a critical swing factor. Is that better leverage of the total investment? But we don't have any information right now
Right,
that
right, right. All
would
right,
support that.
I mean, if the city comes back and can say, what we really need at times when your facility would be most fully utilized is we need 2 movement spaces, Could then the addition or a slight increase in that space accommodate the city for 2 additional movement spaces that they could have autonomy to? That would be helpful to know, or it's just not gonna work.
so I'm looking at it a little bit differently, in how much can our needs be accommodated in the city recreation facility? I'd like those questions to be asked as well. If they can go to an indoor track and field, we wouldn't be able to, if we didn't have that facility here, would we have a facility that the people could go up to Dorset Park, or Veterans Memorial Park, I should say?
We would have
So
to,
I have as much of the question on
Yeah,
the
on the
other
other
way,
side,
is,
yeah.
is how much would they be able to accommodate what we need, so we can scale down a little bit as far as the indoor track and field, or the physical,
the physical
area.
education space, we would have to then increase the high school size for like the gym space.
Right.
And a
right,
performance gym probably.
Right,
As
right.
far as the indoor track and that component, that could likely be, picked up if that was their interest.
So, Mark, we did meet with the city during the feasibility study to have that conversation when we first heard about the need for the track facility. And so that question was asked, could this be complementary to what the city was looking at for their recreation program? And the comment back at that time was, it's not a rec department-driven program, an indoor competition track. There's nothing in the South Burlington rec program leading. It's a high school competition sport. And it's nothing that they would be looking at, because they don't have any of their services that would need a facility such as
So
that.
who was the conversation with?
We were in there with Kevin and Tom and
Okay.
Holly, I think.
All right.
But again, we're trying to refresh that conversation and have a real deliberate conversation of, like you say, on both sides of the conversation.
Right, all right.
And I had a question. There's been some visibility now to a pool, a indoor pool in South Burlington. It was, I guess I'm asking, how did an indoor track get on the plans that never showed this before versus a pool, for instance? I mean, I understand the data that you presented there. There's a number of students, a high number of students who participate in this, and we have the weather issues and things like that. I guess that's a fundamental question I have, because this did not show up in any of the 8 previous designs that we looked at before.
Correct. So this versus the pool or swimming program?
Or anything else for that matter.
I don't
We
think
we
this.
definitely, I think in the onset, we're identifying ways to accommodate indoor track within the high school facility. We had gym spaces that were larger, that had, spaces to appropriately recreate. We did not have a competition track in any of those concepts, but we had space accommodating for indoor track, because we recognize that what we have now is just not okay. As far as the pool, that never came up. It's not, part of our curriculum in any way. It's not part of our current offerings. So it did not enter into the conversation. I do know that, like you, the city has been, city, community, whomever has been talking about.
So can you just explain, for my understanding, how it went from bigger phys ed spaces or bigger gyms within the high school to sort of dedicated space now?
I can do that. So it really came out of the working group, and it started with a conversation about equity for co-curricular, and the number of students that participated in indoor track, and the conversation kind of developed with administrators, where it was talked about that individual sports, right? There are no cuts in indoor track. It creates a big opportunity for students who don't play team sports, don't make teams, that it's very inclusive, right? That's where the conversation really began. And then it kind of morphed into opportunities to combine physical education space with a participative sport that had like no availability and it was potentially at risk going forward because there are no competition level facilities for indoor track available anywhere in Vermont.
And has this, it sounded like you contacted or there was some reach out to other schools. Was there feedback on sort of the level of interest in?
There was a user group meeting for, track and field experts at both the university and the high school level, former athletes, administrators, athletic directors from UVM, Mike Jabor, one from Randolph, where we continued.
Taxpayers represented?
Yeah, there were a bunch of South Burlington.
Parent taxpayers?
Yeah.
Yes.
About, David, can you give me remind me of a fact, how many children are in the school system now?
Well, we're around 2,500 probably.
And how many parents do those children represent? Because some parents will have more than one child in the school system. So.
Well, it's a small percentage. We're in a user group kind of dipping our toe into whether or not this is even feasible, I think, at present, Jerry. Just trying to, again, provide a little bit of feedback.
The only figure I've seen so far in the paper is $170 million. Is that still a working number?
That was initial number that came out kind of in those various options. It actually had some options at 190 or so.
Did that include the track and field?
That did not, but it did have, physical education space that did accommodate our indoor track folks preparing for a competition, but it did not have a space where they could actually compete. That's a big issue right now that, the university, we don't have availability to it. It's UVM, and Norwich is really pretty much cut off too, and it's farther away. And so those are really the only options. So again, the sport, or the activity, if you will, is at risk.
I'm not arguing how valuable some of these things are. I'm arguing from the standpoint of how much is the cost. You're going to go to bond
And again, I
It's
think,
an enormous sized bond you're gonna go to. This year's city tax bill was up 4.2% in an economy with the inflation is less than 2%.
Yeah.
This is going to have a big impact, and as I look at the numbers there, so you're gonna go maybe to the voters for information campaign between December and March, if I follow the schedule correctly, during the Christmas holidays, the New Year's intercession, during the dead of winter. And you're going to expect the community to do due diligence to look at what you're proposing and make a decision as to whether somewhere between 170, and usually these projects double in cost over time, somewhere between 170 and $300 million is a good idea for the community. I'm not arguing against the value of a great new building and a great new track. I'm doing a cost assessment. The other thing I haven't heard is, has anybody done a carbon footprint of this project? South Burlington says they care about global warming. Burlington cares about global warming. They want to put up a new city place. South Burlington cares about global warming. They want to put up a brand new school system with a new track center. These things that involve enormous amounts of concrete, steel, asphalt, and everything else. The carbon footprint of these projects is enormous. Has anybody ever thought about doing a carbon footprint of the project? Have the architects?
again, part of our desire is to be as efficient as we possibly can on the environment and to be LEED, at least minimally LEED certified. Our buildings are currently not. Our buildings, we've done good work to them, but we know they aren't running as efficiently as they can. So there's a lot of, of those pieces as well.
Super efficient buildings are great, but there's an enormous, it's like people want industrial wind turbines. Nobody ever looks at the amount of steel and energy that goes into building an IWT. It's enormous.
And we're not looking at doing a wind turbine.
I'm not saying you're gonna put it in, what I'm telling you is,
Yes, understand.
downstream, you're gonna get benefits, but the infrastructure costs of building these new buildings in terms of energy consumption is very significant. So when you put out a big dollar project, large carbon footprint, those are the things that someone in Vermont who's concerned about global warming, who's concerned about being fiscally responsible is going to want to know about. And also, as always, the last figure I have is about 70% of residents in the community have no children in the school system. Doesn't mean that they don't care about the school system. It simply means that they want to make sure that the money you're spending is balanced against the environmental impact and what you're getting for that money.
Agreed.
And that's, those are important issues to me.
Agreed.
And I think if you're going to the community between December and March, in the dead of winter during the holiday season, I just think that's a bad plan. I just think it's a terrible time to go to the voters with an informational campaign and then have them vote on a mega project in March. You're running much faster than you should, in my opinion.
Yeah, from a board perspective, Jerry, I think Martin summarized it best. It's a heavy lift. And one of our goals was to move it to a place where we could actually get some better numbers so that we could take something out with some credibility. But we know the hurdles in front of us, but we have made a decision unanimously to kind of move it forward to understand it. And we know that's an ambitious target. And that's why we're sitting here having this conversation. And one of my questions is really the time frame, even getting to the next stage. You had September, I think, on there, Lee,
September
board direction.
4th, for board direction.
Yeah, and what's the plan for additional community feedback between now and that period of time? Because you've shared with us some of the affinity groups and user groups,
Right.
and is there more feedback that could be expected in that timeframe?
We have some parent feedback we're working in to get in for, the latter part of August. Bridget's and again, I think this is a good opportunity to open that up. We're looking for additional parent feedback, and kind of what we're talking is our user group meetings, a little larger parent, again, to give some opportunity for feedback. With a high concentration of our elementary families, because again, those are the ones that are going to have the questions, not excluding our middle and high, but we want to make sure that the elementary parents are included as well. I think this, the reason that we're trying to do this information session tonight is to get, for the board primarily, but also for the community. And again, we've been doing as much as we can due diligence-wise around just trying to get out website updates and articles, if you will, again, press release, we've been trying to do that. Again, I think, as you said, Elizabeth, and you as well, Martin, we recognize it's a heavy lift. At the same time, I think the backstory also needs to be reaffirmed that our facilities, although been well cared for, you've got a $55 million upgrade that has to happen at some point, and that has no additional educational value at all. So I think, again, that's a lot of what the community seems to be latching onto, those numbers.
Well, that's, I
and
mean,
give
that's,
credibility to where
that
you're
it
at.
was a big driver of the board's
That's right.
decision to move forward.
So I'm
too.
just trying to make sure that that isn't forgotten in this conversation.
I don't get the impression the community is latching on to much of anything yet. Parents might be. And I do think we need to continue to push as far as getting non-parents in the loop
Yeah.
on this. And I'm not sure what's being done with that. I guess that's a question I could ask Lee, what.
I think there needs to be a series of community forums to be able to have these discussions. And usually in those types of forums, the community wants to know, well, what is it exactly that we're talking about? And
We
that's
need a
where
little
we're
more.
trying to hone
Right.
this down to, so
Right.
we have more answers when those questions get asked.
So we're not waiting until December to start that kind of outreach to the community. That's gonna happen after September 4th presumably, so. So the other thing that Jerry raised, actually, it was something I was planning on raise as well, and that is having some concept of the carbon trade-offs, a carbon footprint of what we're doing, what we're saving over the life of these new buildings versus what it's costing as far as the carbon output for the construction, for the tearing down the two buildings that we have right now. I don't know if that's something that's currently planned. If it's not, I think Jerry's right, that a lot of people, including myself, that is one of the considerations, so.
It can, we need some more information to be able to run an effective analysis on that. Right now, it's
Right, you still
only-
don't have enough information for that, but if
Right.
that's,
But that's something, we have had lots of conversations about sustainability and getting these net zero ready, and, what level, and we've got some meetings that we're trying to set up with the city on, the sustainability side and efficiency. So those conversations, they all get integrated into kind of a holistic design process.
So Lee,
Just a point
how
of
about the,
clarification, Elizabeth. The March vote, is it a go vote to go ahead with the project? Or is it a vote in which the community says, we're voting no on a new building? In
Either,
other words,
right?
if the community comes back and says, we don't approve this budget, you'll go back and you'll say, well, we'll jiggle the figures, we'll come up with a new proposal. So is the vote in March a go vote? Or is it a vote on a specific project, and if the voters say no, you go back to the boardroom and you play around with the figures a little bit more?
I mean, my understanding would be that we're gonna have one article's gonna be our budget, and another article's gonna be the bond.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be a yes or no to the bond, that it will entail the wishes and what the board has pushed forward. If it's no, then it will be back in front of the board on what do you wanna do? Obviously, within our budget, we'll have to have some levels of contingency, on how we pay for the service if the bond doesn't move forward, then, it doesn't pass. So we'll have to figure that out. But again, it's back to the board to determine what next, and giving them the feedback back to myself, and in this case, Doran Whittier, to say, where do you want to go now? Do you want to go from concept whatever, to something lesser that we've previously identified, or something totally different?
Lee, quick question. Some of the leverage we had with the connection between the high school and the middle school was the shared facility, like cafeteria, things like
Yes.
that. Do any of these concepts, it looked physically like some of them might eliminate that? Is that,
Yes, anything where we're connecting to the existing middle school and just doing infrastructure upgrades, we're gonna lose that potential economy of shared kitchen, two separate cafeterias. This concept keeps that, we actually highlighted that in this drawing. It's, one kitchen serving two cafeterias, one physical plant. So those economies of scale work with this geometry and the relationship of the buildings, When we scatter the buildings in different configurations, it's harder to get those two functions adjacent to each other. So those are some of the things that we'll be coming back to point out to you, along with the cost estimates, saying, you know, here are the pros and cons of each of these options, so you guys can evaluate them on their own. With the goal being to come back to you guys in December with a project. This is what it looks like. This is how much it costs. Now we've got a lot more information to be able to run projections on operational cost and utility usage and, you know, carbon, all of that stuff. We're working to develop that information, so when we get ready to go to the voters for that informational campaign, we've got all the answers for that.
So that is something I would like to see by the September timeframe then, would be where there are trade-offs with any of these recommendations against the original decision-making we did, against the two concepts of the middle school, high school combined, and then middle school infrastructure with a new high school. That would be helpful to me.
So we've thought through those and we're pricing those, and when we talk about these on the 21st individually, we'll be able to tell you
Okay.
this option meets those requirements and it costs this and here's the phasing, and be able to go through each of those iterations with you.
Great.
So I have a question. And some of the designs, I believe I saw that there used to be, like, it wasn't per se the VPA sized track, but there were some ideas of having an indoor something or other for the indoor track team in those, like, first 8 designs. And I'm just, because obviously indoor track is existing because there's indoor track meets somewhere. And so I'm a little confused as why it's South Burlington's responsibility to create this VPA-sized arena, when I understand finding a place for our track team to practice, but I'm just not understanding why we would create this whole VPA-sized thing when it's not, well, it's not like South Burlington will make or break whether indoor track continues in Vermont.
Yeah, I think,
It actually,
good question.
it
Paul.
actually could.
But it could, that's right. And I think the worry is that if, you know, we'll have to go to larger measures to find a place for our students to compete.
Gotcha.
So they'll have to travel farther. I don't, they'll have to probably go to New Hampshire or something. We do that a little bit, and then it gets difficult, obviously, to have other teams do the same. And so it's really, again, I think, you know, Gary brought up, you know, equity. It is something that we're trying to be really mindful of around how we can provide these opportunities, which are very significantly connected to our ends and our outcomes for kids to have the opportunities to be able to participate and interact in order to meet them.
Is there an offsetting revenue that accommodates
Yeah,
a portion of this construction?
We haven't, I mean, we do not, I mean, I think this is important. If it was a competition-sized event, we want to be careful that we want to be able to fully utilize it ourselves.
Mhm.
You know, that's to the South Burlington taxpayers and students. But we do think that there's opportunities to seek pretty significant revenue as a result for hours when we would not be using it. That said, we haven't been, I mean, we haven't run any specific numbers, but given the feedback that we've had from some of the others, we believe that it would certainly pay for the operational costs, the heat, any sort of a facility upkeep, and, you know, facility person to oversee it and run it. So, again, maybe we could be harder on that and say, you know, that we could be, you know, making some additional revenue from it. But I don't, at this point, we haven't really pushed those numbers. And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know, maybe there's other.
I'd say that's accurate. We believe, although we haven't studied it until we get some direction, we haven't put the energy into that. We believe it could be self-sustaining from an operational standpoint, and some of the costs that David outlined. And we, anecdotally, from groups, we know that there will be a great demand for any available time from groups like 802 lacrosse. You know, I'm not speaking for any group, but the potential groups are, you know, the far post soccers, all the indoor soccer leagues, indoor box lacrosse, 802 lacrosse, Other schools needing an indoor winter practice facility, that pay for facilities now or don't do certain winter sports because they don't have an available facility.
I think what you're gonna see is that it's gonna be as in demand as a hockey rink is these
I
days,
agree.
or perhaps more.
I agree, because it'll be more versatile. There'll be,
Yep.
you know, it's a true multi-sport, you know, conceptual plan.
So in addition to the, backing up to the parent group feedback, it's also important to mention that the fairly newly formed, I think, third year now, South Burlington Business Association is interested in understanding what we're doing, I think from a multitude of facets, from taxes, and from also usage. And I know, at least from some of them, that they recognize that when there are events going on at Dorset Park, for soccer or hockey, hockey in this case, that when all of the facilities there in UVM are tied up, it has been significant for revenue within the business community for hotels and meals and restaurants, et cetera. So I think we have a meeting, I have tentatively sent out some dates to them for September, 3 dates that a smaller group of the working group will be meeting with them to understand what they have for specific questions, with the idea that we'll go to them for a full-up presentation, I want to say December, January timeframe
January,
for
they
them,
will.
yeah, prior to the March vote. So they're
Well, I
also
think-
very
I mean, I
interested.
think Cole asked a good question, which is if this is a concept that the board agrees should go to the next phase, I think we will owe it to voters to understand if South Burlington is funding more than what the curriculum requirements are in this design, what would the offsetting revenue stream look like that would alleviate some of that? I mean, it's
So
fundamental.
anecdotally, there are 6 BPA-sanctioned indoor track events, all held around UVM schedule and can only be one day. And they generate, from talking to athletic directors, about $3,000 per day of revenue when an indoor track meet is held.
And have I also heard that UVM maybe is reconsidering allowing that?
Yes.
I maybe phrased that wrong, but,
No, you're
Well,
right. I think a lot of it's not on
It's not,
desirability, it's
Yes.
on the conflicts for them
Right.
and some of their current
right.
situations. You
Yeah.
have a question from,
Are we gonna be able to handle the parking if this generates a lot of interest?
Yes, that's part of the factor, is understanding what the parking requirements are gonna be, and that's why we're trying to figure out what the scope of the project is, so we can kind of nail down that number. We've looked at it preliminarily.
If there's such a requirement for this, I wonder why no one else has tackled it.
it's on the cusp, I think, as a result of, as we mentioned earlier, Bob, Norwich and UVM and Middlebury's really not available. It's just, we're not.
A ballpark figure what this might cost?
Not until the 21st, and I think it's important to note that while, it is 60,000 square feet, a lot of that 60,000 square feet, we already had program space for. So that's part of what I was trying to say, is the efficiency of, the gyms that we were gonna build anyway, to put them inside of that. So when we come back on the 21st, we'll be able to tell you what the net square footage add is above what our program was to accommodate this need.
And that's a little
And
bit of
here's
what
the
I'm
costs.
asking is net square footage add versus the
Correct.
revenue trade-off, which, if you look at just net square footage, it's probably, it will be a lot better than looking to recoup the total cost too, but it would be nice to have some offset.
We know this is a lot of information, and again, I think a lot of good questions back to us as we're trying to carry out your mission of, the high school, new middle school, and again, this particular indoor track component came up, so again, that's added into this, but we'll continue our work, and you can look for another update on the 21st with some information. I don't know, Whether or not we'll be able to get much out before then, Lee, probably not, correct?
It's gonna be pretty tight. We're hustling right now to.
So we're gonna devote, and we'll get to that agenda tonight, but we're gonna devote probably an hour or so, if not a little bit more, to this work for the 21st. And certainly would encourage anyone who has contact with public to come out and, we'll try
Yeah,
to make sure it's well broadcasted.
I might suggest we think about, given the time of the year, and, I mean, the official start of school is the 23rd, that we maybe be a little more visible with that particular meeting agenda in the other paper from a inclusion standpoint, because there just aren't that many opportunities to share this info with the public.
Do you think we would need a time adjustment for that meeting, given the duration of the work?
Time adjustment for,
For
like,
the start of the meeting?
I think our published meeting starts are probably fine, Gary. I think that, otherwise, I think we move that around, people will not be able to make it. But we may need to look at whether testing the 1 hour or not is enough. Maybe we need to go to 1 hour and 15 or 1 hour and 20 or something with questions, and really try to get out a higher visible invite list, maybe invite through other paper.
We're going to
and-
review that agenda tonight,
Yeah.
right? Maybe we can look at paring that agenda down
Yeah,
to free up time.
thank you, Lee.
All right, we'll move on to agenda 9. Oh, sorry?
Just one quick question.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Sorry. In Bridget's last update, she had mentioned both the indoor track as one of the decisions, and the other one was the performance space and the size of it.
Yep.
Is that not?
Good, I think that's great that you brought that up, because that is, our performance, the performance space, or what we have called, what we currently have as the auditorium, and our stage is definitely factored into the current design. We are, as we said earlier, with the city, both on the recreation space and the performing arts space. Similarly to the recreation space, we're asking the same question, because there has been some conversation within the city about wanting a performance space. And I think most people are pretty aware of that. And so we're wanting to have that question with them too. Currently, our auditorium is fairly small. That may be fine for us. Again, we may plus that up a little bit, but if it was going to be something that was co-shared and co-used by the city or performing arts group, that's a conversation we'd like to have before we go too much further. So that's on there as well, and city officials are helping to, help set those meetings up for us.
So that hasn't been decided yet?
No.
Okay, so it's up there with the track?
Yep.
And my understanding is the performing arts needs will be after from a city standpoint, would come after the rec department.
The conversation with them?
Yeah, timing-wise, I think.
Well, we're trying to get them in. I mean, part of this is just trying to get folks from the city who've expressed interest to try to at least, be part of the conversation with us before we go too far, so we can ask the questions. But ultimately, it's got to come back to you folks to understand kind of what you just did around the indoor track facility. What's the added?
But by way of example, the city has engaged Freeman French Freeman to do this design phase or concept phase.
Right, I know where you're going now.
And there's not a similar
That's
engagement on the
correct.
performing arts side.
Gotcha.
So by virtue of just where resource deployment is.
That's right.
Yeah,
You're absolutely right. But we didn't want to not have the conversation with them.
right. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 9, Phase 3 Master Planning and Visioning Funding.
So I'm just going to preface
Easy one.
items 8, 8, 9, and 12. I think if we're all right, maybe we'll just combine 9 and 12 right now. And I'm going to ask Gary just to kind of walk you through some of these. Obviously, we aren't able to give you a lot of definitiveness on the bonding because we don't have the total cost. But again, there's some work that's currently going on, and Gary's going to update you on both of those.
Yes, so we'll start with the master planning and visioning, this phase. Phase 3, the schematic design that you directed on June 6th to explore these options. So we had gotten some opinions about using the capital reserve fund that we had discussion about in the past. So I reviewed those options with our council, and we've determined that because of the wording of the ballot that established the capital reserve fund, and we've gotten two opinions on this, because it is tied to two things. One, it has to be a capital-related project. We meet that requirement. The requirement that we don't meet in this Phase 3 funding is a direct tie to our facility stewardship plan, which was the wording in the original ballot that was voted on. So that is no longer an option based on that ballot. So we've prepared and we've worked with our local bank to establish 2.8% line of credit that will come to you for consideration and approval on August 21st. Along with that, okay, so that will not mature and come due until the next fiscal year, FY20. So we will have to, at minimum, budget the debt service because it's a renewable line of credit. So we'll have to include in the 21 budget the debt service on the $350,000 that we're proposing to cover the Phase 3 costs of the design phase. So that's pretty much where we are there. It will come with a resolution, board resolution to allow that if a positive vote happens, that cost that you have incurred, the borrowing cost and the Phase 3 work, will be able to be included in the bond funding. So that's the master planning and visioning funding update.
Again, it's a little complicated, right? Because we didn't budget for the work, right? But we need to pay for the work, and so this is, again, the legal counsel's advisement on how we would do this. So,
So the work being the planning of the architectural firm, the design.
that's correct.
Mhm.
The figure is $350,000, is that correct? Is
No.
that what you just said?
That cost is $300,000.
Right. Thank you, Gary. And the
Moving
other,
on, included in that, so
Oh, just as a quick note on that,
Yes.
thank you for clarifying that on the capital reserve that we set aside, because I do think, to go back to what we presented to voters and what we intended, it was good to clarify that. And had we not had language in there that either linked it to existing, I forget what your language was, Gary, existing stewardship
Yeah.
Planning, we might have had more flexibility, but I'm also not sure that wasn't our intent at the time. So I'm glad we're staying clear to what that intent was.
We've had a lot of discussion about the risk incurred.
Yeah.
You know, we
This is
fully
a-
stand by the capital reserve fund. We think that given the current, again, we work hard to maintain the buildings and have them up and running, but we think that capital reserve fund is an important one for us to hold on to and to not have any deficits, without the risk incurred.
Can you just clarify with me exactly what the 2.8% line of credit means?
That
the
our,
bank has provided for.
yeah, our current bank will allow us to carry a $350,000 line of credit to pay for this,
And so what does the 2.8% figure mean?
is the interest rate.
Okay.
And to kind of roll 12 in, so I'd given you a primer on bond funding, and one of the things that is one of the very first steps is to identify a financial advisor, because that's a requirement. To explore, to do all the analysis, to get a credit rating, all of the things that go along with issuing bonds as a private municipal entity will have to be done. So we have prepared an RFP to be able to evaluate and select a financial advisor. And that timeline, and again, that'll be another that'll be another thing that we will have to do a board resolution on. So the costs of the financial advisor, if we have a positive bond vote, based on the financial advisor's work, will be included in the bond. And that timeline that we've developed is we will issue this RFP. We've just prepared it. It'll be reviewed by our legal counsel. And we will issue the RFP on August 19th. Last day for bidding firms to submit written questions is August 30th. We'll post the addenda on September 6th. Proposals are due on September 16th. Notice of interviews for the firms we select to interview will happen on September 25th. We'll interview October 8th and 9th and make a recommendation to the superintendent, who will make a recommendation to you by October 11th for your review and recommendation and selection on October 16th. That's our schedule. That meets the timeline to get the preparation work done and be prepared if we get a positive vote in March.
Have we communicated with Burlington and Winooski about any of the services they engaged in their bond votes?
I have not, no.
I've only a tad bit with Winooski.
Yeah, I don't know if there's some learnings there in terms of specs in the RFP or.
I wasn't even, I'll have to do some research to see how much private offerings,
they've done.
private issuing they did, because I know they used the bond bank for some of it.
Okay,
They're both
yeah, that's a
pretty
good point.
sizable.
Actually, yeah, I didn't know how much of the
They're
bond
both
bank they
pretty
would use.
sizable, 80,
Mhm.
both are in the 80s, I think. Maybe one's a little higher in the
I thought
80s.
Winooski was 58.
I thought Winooski was in the 50s and, yeah.
Burlington's in the 80s,
Yeah.
yeah. But certainly, I think it's good, Elizabeth, we can, a lot of them are in that phase right now. We can
Mhm.
ask, yeah, it's good.
So question on the funding issue, broader question. Have we reached out yet to our representation down in Washington as far as infrastructure? I don't know that anything's gonna happen in the next 2 years, but it wouldn't be bad to
As far as,
start getting them in the loop, our senators
construction aid,
and.
that type of thing, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, if there's, I know Kamala Harris is talking about a $230 million investment in school infrastructure. 230 million? No, that's nothing. Billion.
That-
Two-
Yeah.
230, no,
Drop in the
2.3
bucket.
billion. Whatever it is. Forgetting about that, but I mean, there is always this talk of the infrastructure and that we need to be financing infrastructure, and certainly would want our representatives to understand that we certainly have some infrastructure needs here.
You certainly can. Would you like to be part of when we do reach out?
No, I don't need to be. No, I think it'd be fine, but I just want to know that that's happened.
And I've done a fair amount of reaching out, as you know, on the school construction side, and
Right,
we're still trying to keep that alive in Vermont, with a meeting coming up next week.
Yeah, it's been getting some press as well, and
But-
I don't see
Anything happening probably next
that
couple years.
happening very quickly
Yeah,
because of
I think my
other-
concern on the state side is with the legislation that passed on the, is it lead
Mhm.
testing?
Lead water.
There's some funding for the
Shortcut.
testing, so obviously those results are going to yield some potential needs, and I think that will by
That's gonna take
default become the
precedent.
first priority.
Well, and also having bond rating going down, it's gonna, our capacity for any kind of capital is reducing.
Right,
So it's unlikely.
yeah.
I mean, I'm still pressing for that, but
Yeah, and I
But
appreciate you.
if there is going to be a federal infrastructure law that finally comes out,
Be nice to know sooner rather than later.
well,
Yeah.
just,
Can ask.
I did ask the bond rating question to the financial advisor who gave us the primer on municipal issuance, and what she said, and it wasn't entirely in jest, is that no school had ever been rated at AAA, so not to be concerned that the state was not AAA anymore.
Okay, any other questions
No,
on that?
appreciate
area?
your time and good questions. Thanks. Helpful.
All right, we'll move on to agenda item 10, the junior class school board representative. So I don't know if you have any update, Cole, but I think we have the criteria in place. I think you've communicated with Mr. Burke about getting that out
Okay.
fairly quickly, and I don't know if you were going to do any unique reach out once school started or not.
Sure. So, right now my plan is to get in contact with Mr. Burke before the school starts to hear what his thoughts are on distributing that. I'm planning on talking with the class of 2021's student council officers to see what we can do about reaching out, having them reach out to their class as they are their peers, while also keeping myself available for anyone that wants to ask questions. I had a question. I brought my application. Are we planning on doing the same one, or is it different, or?
I think what we used with you would be the same.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think, from the board's perspective, again, we were missing you. We would have loved to have had you on earlier, and I think, we'd like not to waste a lot of time in getting someone like you beside you, so it would be ideal if we could really and I'll make sure Mr. Burke knows about reaching out to him and getting that. We recognize you got to get students on board, but through email, we would hope that anyone interested in serving, and then you may be able to do some of that within your own internal communications as well, as to start getting individuals that might really enjoy being part of the group,
Do you recall what month you came on board, Cole?
I know I got the email that I think it was November, because I remember I got the email saying that I was on the board in November.
Because I think that's what Mr. Young is saying, is if we can get somebody, even in the October timeframe, we're already
Realistic.
heavy into the budget period in November, as you probably recall. So even just getting a couple of meetings more with that student rep would be very helpful.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Good.
Well, let me or any board member know if we can be of any assistance, but also if you want to let them know how to contact any board member by email or phone through the district website. We could also answer questions.
Sure.
Great. All right, agenda item 11, consider the school board yearly agenda. Got the big chart.
Yep. So, again, I don't think this does a lot for you at the moment, because I think we kind of need to give you a little bit of synopsis of how we did this year. And this is just my current reflection. I think what would be good to inform this would be, how did we do last year? Right? And I think we can be a little bit aggressive at times with what we think we can get done, but given the complexity of what's going to come before us, with all of the information, I'm wanting to just look at some things. I think there's maybe some things that we can do on some redundant ones without dropping the importance of the financial conditions, like 2.4. Maybe instead of having a full-up monitoring report, we can get I'm going to say, a status update or something like that. And that could happen instead of that. But I guess what I'd like to be able to do is, certainly answer any questions you have, the things that stand out to you. But I guess I'd like to work with Delina, from our previous calendar, where did we actually do them? And try to ask the question and give you a little bit of feedback, like, here's, I think, some of the reason why we didn't get to it.
I think that would be helpful, but also this isn't specifically, right now it looks pretty exclusive to policy monitoring.
Correct.
And it isn't exclusive to that, because there's things like the VSBA conference in there. I do think we might want to add some of the work we've talked about on master planning and visioning. And then, Martin, from your standpoint, maybe legislative points of interest. that we want to be a little bit more linked to. So if there's a position statement or something, we need to be
Yeah,
prepared for
probably,
that.
we'd want to do that in December, I would think.
Well, part of, what we've been, at least administratively, we spent some time with Val Gardner, who's kind of the policy governance guru, and been working to just try to help, again, learn more about policy governance, how it can help inform our work, and looking at the cycle of when things come up, So things that are happening, I'm not going to be exact, but February through June are almost informing of what you're going to be doing for budgeting, for the upcoming year, September and October. Things that are happening in August through December, are things that are going to inform the latter part. And again, I'm not necessarily giving you an exact clear picture, but, when we get to like financial planning and budgeting, that may be almost too late in October. So we were actually pulling from the previous year, so would it be smarter to put it towards, towards the end of the year, in April or May? Again, I'm just throwing that out there, but that's part of what we've been asking questions back to, like, why is it here, and for all of these works. Now, obviously, ends reporting, we think is, that's critical, and they're all critical, but the timing of them, we're just really trying to figure out.
Well, and I'm looking at this a little bit differently than we initially looked at it around policy governance, which is this can be a good onboarding tool for new board members, but also could be the actual literal working plan for the board to understand. And I'll give you a specific example. I know I had made a note to make sure we add superintendent evaluation, and here it is in April, and we did not do that. We did not complete that. It's in progress, but that's a good example where if this was in front of us at every meeting, I think, like the other paper articles, there'd be a little more visibility.
Yeah. So why don't, unless I hear additional, this is, again, just, we're sharing it initially. I'll bring back kind of how we did this year. What does it look like? I'm kind of going old-fashioned, like putting an overlay over it to like where we actually did them, but I won't do that. But and then we'll have that conversation, and by then I may be able to help, move some of this around with suggestions.
We should decide in conjunction with that what we want to move from the future agenda items onto here. And I'm looking at them, and some of them I don't remember why they're here.
Well, some of them I did start putting some things on here, like non-union support staff and manual 2.2 treatment of staff.
That would be in.
Right,
Yeah, okay,
so
that'd be in
again, I'm
2.2.
leaving it on here until we actually do it, and then you can take it off. Youth risk behavior survey, same thing. So.
Okay, we'll look forward to getting that.
Yep.
All right, we'll move on to agenda item 13, negotiations update. I think we can be fairly brief here. I think we reported this at the last meeting that the fact-finding report is due August 21st. So at that point, we will have the non-binding recommendations of the fact finder. And hopefully we will be scheduling a meeting shortly thereafter. But as always, the board is available to come to the table. Anything else from that perspective? All right, other paper articles? I think we're off on this schedule here.
So I take it you didn't hand in one last week?
No, and I'm almost thinking this is not updated because I think we took one off, if I recall. And I thought we had some others on here, but is this, Meg, is this the most update you know? Okay, well, obviously, we don't have something for 8-1. I'm sorry?
We weren't planning on having one.
I think you're right that was.
I thought we,
Yeah,
And there
we
was going
took
to
it
be a
off.
series on master planning and visioning, no?
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah, I think the 180 market, that, the second one, I think we were, or the first one we were not, Elizabeth was not going to do that one, the 180 market.
I think it's been well covered
And I think
In
it,
the other
I think
paper,
it
I don't
got
think we
covered.
need
I
to-
didn't know where we'd be at the time, but I think
Right.
that's been well covered.
Yeah, I
so.
don't think we need to do anything with that.
But I think there's a series of these articles now that, you think you just said this, master planning and visioning.
That's what I thought we had discussed, yes.
Mhm. Well, if this one will be done 8/29 to run 9/5, so we will have the benefits of the meeting on the 21st, but we will not have any action that you might have proposed
Right.
for a September meeting.
I mean, I think for that one, we could still do a preview of, welcome back kind of,
Mhm.
and here's some broad things to expect in this coming school year.
Okay.
Where we could flag that the master plan envisioning is
Yeah, some of the
coming
things
to
that
a
are upon us.
conclusion, what's going on with
Yeah, 180
Central,
Market,
what's going on with.
airport.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So why don't I take
Roger.
that one for submission on the 29th? But
Mhm. Can help you with those, yeah.
can you send me,
You bet.
Meg, could I ask for a reminder on that one by email?
We'll be fine.
I'm gonna
Thanks.
call that one welcome back.
We can
back.
talk about priorities for the 1920 school year.
Then I don't know, I think that there's at least probably a good number of those that follow will be on the master plan
Yeah,
and
we'll have to
visioning,
talk about what one
you know?
should, yeah.
And I know Bridget certainly has expressed, a desire to do some of those.
So if I think about topics, one of the first one would be sort of recommended design.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of them would be funding mechanism or funding. And then one would be, educational impact, if I'm thinking about broad topics.
Yep.
Yeah,
Good.
So the impact, education impact, but we've got funding mechanism. Included in that funding mechanism would be expected tax rate piece, or would that be a separate piece on its own? Tax implication
I think
estimated
it can
tax.
be as details as we have available at the time,
Yeah.
but in terms of, I guess I'm thinking about that, just thinking out loud, the order that we will have both information and then can update the public with
Yeah.
what we know at that point.
Mm-hmm. So that kind of goes along with the design of funding mechanism, then
And the educational.
educate impact, right? And then maybe after that, we're into some of the other pieces of tax.
Well, we're into budget by then.
Right, but then I think we'll be able to show that, right?
Mhm.
Along with budget. It's fine. Okay.
Any other topics from a time of the year standpoint? I mean, the last budget one before
And I think we have some
town
stuff.
meeting would be the 1:30 submission, so.
I think we have we got to pay attention to Rick Marcotte probably, 180 Market. Might be an update on project or, because it's going to close, Market Street's going to reopen in November.
Mhm.
I think we'll get more of an update on what's going on with 180 Market. I think the airport probably will have some, on Chamberlain School, there'll probably be some updates there.
And I think there'll be an update on negotiations.
Yeah.
So why don't, we'll put those as just placeholders
Yep.
below. But actually, we have a couple of those here.
Mm-hmm.
The teacher negotiations are for which calendar year? Current one?
The current contract expired on June 30th.
So you're still trying to get a contract for the upcoming academic year?
Correct.
And is that required, or if you don't, will you have a fallback position? How does that work?
Typically, the fallback is status quo. But, we're working hard to get a settled agreement. Our goal, as I think we've been publicly, was to try to negotiate a settlement prior to the start of the school year. But because fact-finding will come actually 2 days before the official start of the year, that's not likely at this point. But we're committed to working hard to get a settlement as soon as
The last
possible.
article I read, as I read between the lines, it seemed like there was a bit of friction between the two discussing parties? Has it moved into a more congenial phase?
We
Or is it
had,
still challenging?
we had a mediation that did not result in a settlement. I think the discussion's ongoing. And at the end of the day, Jerry, as you know, and I think I speak for the board, we value our teachers and we're interested in a settlement. We also recognize that it's a significant portion of the district's budget and are trying to be fiscally prudent and compensate our teachers well with wages and benefits that are fair.
And I think the teachers in the school system are compensated very fairly.
They are, more than.
Last question, David. You mentioned a figure, 55 million. Is that deferred maintenance, or is that the amount you feel would be necessary to bring the school up to standard for a safe infrastructure school, because of deferred maintenance building up over the years? It would require $55 million of input to really bring it up to snuff.
Yeah, so this was done by Doran Whittier. We did the board approved a phase one approach to look at the structural, the electrical and mechanical structures of the two buildings. And albeit we've worked to maintain the buildings, but there's definitely wear and tear over the years. They identified that amount to be $31 million between the two schools.
Okay.
But in order to mitigate those, you have to do some, you can't just come in and fix it
Sure.
in the summer. So there was offsetting costs to have swing space, or I'm just going to say trailers brought in, so we could renovate those locations structurally, mechanical, and electrically to do them. That brought the costs up to the $55 million. Again, increase the functionality of the facility, but it didn't change any structure, any walls, anything within either of the facilities. Just simply made them, and part of those costs are also incurring, what we know is that when we have to touch certain things, there's an increased cost because of the potential of hazardous material and some of those things that are factored into that.
Do you estimate there's a significant amount of asbestos
Yes.
in the buildings?
Yeah, we do know that. Again, we've followed all of the appropriate guidelines to ensure that they're not within the air of our.
Architectural firm has included in their estimate the cost of asbestos remediation when they tear down the buildings.
That's correct. Yeah.
Those are expensive propositions.
That's right. Yeah, and it's, again, I think similarly is to renovate a space has significant cost too, because you've got to factor in all of those things and separate, all those. So that's how that 55 came to be. Yeah.
But to add on to that, it wasn't due to deferred maintenance.
When I say deferred maintenance, I mean, so you'd like to improve some of the HVAC facilities, but you said you haven't, they're working right now, they could be improved, but you've decided not to do it because the cost might not be justified if you're going to move to a new building.
So HVAC, right, so we've got some structural things that are happening, on some of the structural components of the building. We've got some cracks and foundational things that are starting to show. So there could be a potential, failure in the long term. Those are things that we feel that we need to address. Similarly to the electrical, we've got a 4,000 amp system at the high school because it was all electric heat back in the day with a switchgear that's antiquated, that costs exorbitant amount of money to get repair parts. So in order, so it's those things that factor into that around if you're going to renovate it, upgrade it, then those are significant costs.
So it's 55 versus 170. My concern is also, that's your initial estimate for 170. I've rarely seen a mega project come in at estimate.
Yeah.
So when you get down to it, everything becomes more expensive every day that goes by.
Yeah.
Including the maintenance.
It's just the way things work. I mean, when
That's
they
right.
finally build City Place, it's going to be way over budget.
Yeah, I think that's part of, again, what the board is asking of us, is that we not only look at long-term, but also the phasing. And when you get into 5 and 6 phases, you're out 5 and 6 years, and certainly the cost increases happen as years go down. And so that's a factor as well. And on the other side is to not do anything doesn't make those costs go away. They likely will make them increase more exorbitantly down the road.
I should thank you for putting down the new asphalt at the driveway. to park.
Yep.
Very good.
Less holes, trying to save some tires and trips, yeah. Thanks, Gary.
Just a quick note, Cole, on the articles for the other paper, we would like to invite you to consider writing an article. Would certainly like it to be a topic that you feel strongly and passionately about that impacts the district, and particularly with an impact on maybe the ends policy, but would be certainly open to your recommendation for that article, and we can slot it in where it's appropriate. Sure. Great, thank you. Yep. All right, we'll move on to the agenda for
21st.
21st. Why am I seeing,
It's the wrong date there.
oh, okay.
August 21.
Uh,
You're on,
I'm
you're on blue.
I'm on the
yeah.
wrong one, yeah, sorry. For August 21st.
So I know right out of the gate, we got to reorganize this a little bit because under item 8, we're going to add an hour and I'm going to say 20 minutes or something
Mhm.
like that.
Well, we can shift the hour from the junior class thing because that says that's an hour, and I don't think it's going to take an hour.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I don't know. That's true. Oh, that you made that right up for us. Perfect. But we'll keep you on there.
Mhm.
Well, maybe we could delete that for that meeting because school hasn't started at that point. You will have met with Mr. Burke probably, or at least had
Well,
a
maybe you could just
conversation.
give an update or something.
I can always add that into the student rep update as well.
Why don't we just put that to a sub-bullet point on the student? Yeah.
Junior class board rep. So we'll do it under announcements, Cole?
Sure.
Or your student rep?
So 11 and 12 are redundant also.
11 and 12.
One is the language and one is.
Yep.
One
Oh.
is the policy.
Oh, the monitoring, okay.
Yeah. Paper.
So you can adjust it for that time frame.
Yep.
Maybe you want to see where you're at on
Yeah.
10.
Yep. If we need to then push it, we will, but again, it'd be nice to at least get it back to you guys if,
Mm-hmm.
look at it. Okay.
Right, and we may want to put this on there too, so we can talk about that.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
Make a note of that. All right, future agenda items, any discussion
They'll all be taken care of.
on the master calendar?
Master calendar, right?
Right.
Plan.
So we've got a number of minutes to consider. The July 8th meeting, which was a working session. Seeing no comments or questions, those are approved. The July 9th meeting, which was also, the fact-finding meeting.
Yep.
Seeing no comments, those are approved. The July 10th meeting, which was a regular meeting.
I have two things. I talked to you guys briefly, about the announcements that I had, that I talked to you guys about, and I gave that to Meg. And then also, I was in attendance at that meeting.
You were here for that, yeah.
I
We did
was.
not get you?
No.
Sorry about that, Cole.
And then bottom on page 3,
Yeah.
I think the date is incorrect. Set the agenda for August 7th, and then it said we discussed the agenda for the June 19th. I think it was just copied and pasted wrong.
Okay.
Not very exciting.
So we have attendance, we have your announcements of that, and then we have the date to modify on the minutes of July 10th. And we have July 22nd, which was a working session. Seeing no comments, those are approved. And July 25th.
Under executive session, I don't know if it says that we discussed real estate or 180 Market, but I believe that we did.
July 25th.
25th, yeah. I think it said only that we were going to discuss negotiations with the union.
So,
Because we had David Rue on the phone, didn't we, for executive session?
That says that for the 25th?
Does it?
Yeah. We had guest attorney David Roop by phone.
Well, that part's fine, but I just mean that we also discussed the real estate 180 Market issue as opposed to just
I think
negotiations.
that was under
Is that elsewhere?
the attorney-client communication.
Oh, okay.
I guess I'm a little confused of what, I seconded that motion, okay. Roll call, that was just to enter, okay, all right. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then that was followed up by the regular meeting?
Mhm.
Any comments or changes there?
Under adjournment, Bridget motioned and Brian seconded, but again,
Okay.
minor.
So we had the opposite?
No, I think it just says
It's-
Bridget Burkhart and Brian Minier motioned.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Sort of true, maybe we tied. I don't know.
I think there was a rush to that motion,
Yeah.
as I recall.
Yeah.
I deny it.
All right, so with that minor adjustment,
Gotcha.
those are approved as well. We have a consent agenda item, a hire.
Mm-hmm. So this is a .2 ad to fill a .2 resignation.
I assume that the budgeted salary of, or the salary 77,000, that is prorated to the .2.
Correct.
Isn't it usually,
Yeah,
don't we usually have the prorated
Proration in
amount
there.
on there?
I think this is what was budgeted for the entire F
Right,
1.0.
right.
So it should have,
For the-
I should have had it for the proration. Martin, you're right.
Well, does the .2 bring the individual to a 1.0 FTE position?
I do not believe that's correct.
So there's
I'm not
strictly a
sure.
.2.
I'm not sure about that. If this makes her whole, because she's been .8, I don't know. I can.
Can we clarify that?
Mhm.
And then get a proration if it's appropriate?
So does this have to be approved today, or can it come back on the 21st?
We don't approve these anyway, so I think it would be informational
I'll
to
bring
the
it back
board.
to you for the, yep.
All right, and we have 3 AP orders, actually 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Oh, we're on a new cycle, Gary, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Any questions?
I move to adjourn.
Do we have a second? Did we get a second?
Please, I'll second
I've never had that happen.
Well, he's trying to do his due diligence there. That's
All
what
in,
he's trying to
all in
do.
favor?